Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I will be targeting trout from the banks of beautiful Lake Amador. I am currently here during the late fall, and because of that, this reservoir had been getting quite a bit of healthy stocking of trout. So join me today as I target these trout with Powerbait because I am fishing here today on a weekend and there are a lot of anglers and some bass guys running about. By far, the easiest way to target trout on the weekend, in my opinion, hands down, is with Powerbait. I am using a simple basic Carolina rig with about a 4.5 feet leader to about a size 10 snell hook. I really do like to use snell hooks, but sometimes I will use treble hooks, give or take. Whenever I'm fishing Powerbait, I will fish for keeps. I had a late start to today, so I am starting my fishing session in the middle of the afternoon. There are quite a handful of boaters out here on this small reservoir, and this really doesn't help when trying to target these fish with lures or moving baits. So my strategy today is just to target these fish with Powerbait. I get it, Powerbait fishing isn't exactly the most popular things with some anglers, but in my opinion, when I'm fishing trout for keeps and if there are no special regulations in use of bait, I don't mind using Powerbait. Also, I find that by fishing on the weekend, especially with the numbers of boaters out here, a lot of these fish will often be very skittish, especially with the low clear water. Yes, the reservoir is on the rise, but at a very slow pace, so therefore a lot of these fish are rather skittish, especially with boating traffic. What I have found in the past is with the boating traffic, these fish will often travel very close to the bank, so I am not making a very far cast, but roughly casting it about 10 feet from the bank, and this I will wait for the bite. As soon as I got the rods in the water, the rod on the left hand side ended up getting a bite. I couldn't even set up the bite camera, and I knew right away that this fish had taken off with the Powerbait. When it comes down to targeting this reservoir, there are quite a handful of very popular spots that some anglers really like to fish, such as the corner of the dam itself, or the floating docks. Yes, I have caught fish from those areas, but I have found that those areas on the weekend, I will often have to end up targeting some very skittish fish, and I am not in a mood to target skittish fish. So my strategy today while fishing Powerbait is just to simply point hop. I have walked along the Frisbee Trail and I am targeting these fish from points that juts out into the back creeks. The strategy, however, is just to give the spots an hour or so and to see if each point will give me fish. That way, I can maximize the numbers of area I can target with bait. Some anglers just like to sit in a spot all day, and that may produce some fish, but sometimes those areas might not produce any fish. So by point hopping, I'm able to quickly target area to area to see if there are any feeding fish. This was a very nice Amador cut bow. I'll show him to you guys real quick, and I'll put him on the stringer. My personal preference is to start as close to the back creek as I can and slowly work my way out into the main body of the lake. There were quite a handful of bass anglers out today, so what they were doing was every time I got a good bite going on a specific point, sometimes these bass anglers would blow through the area, thus killing the bite. But rather than wait there the whole day and hope the bite returns, I am going to fish on the move. As I've stated before, I am going to give each point about an hour or so, whether or not the bass anglers run around the area, because this will give me time to determine whether or not these fish had come back or are still feeding in that area actively. One of the biggest problems when targeting trout from the bank at this reservoir on the weekend is the number of boaters out here and the numbers of bank anglers. What I have found is the number of boaters on this reservoir since the Golden Mussel closure is rather insane on the weekend. This reservoir is rather tiny, so it can't really take on a lot of boaters, or else it will often shut off the fishing. The rod on the right hand side ended up getting a bite despite a boat flowing through this area. I knew right away that I caught myself another very nice trout. My preference is to target this reservoir on the weekdays over the weekend if possible. A lot of anglers will often come to this reservoir on the weekend, and what they'll do is they'll often fish some of the most popular spots and will catch a few fish or sometimes no fish. One of the biggest problems with those rather popular spots on the weekend is a lot of anglers will often shut off the bites in those areas, or if there is a bite going, it will often be a very finesse style bite. I can always count on catching a handful of fish with power bait in many of these back areas on points where a lot of anglers will often not like to hike out to. That is my strategy on the weekend whenever I need to catch a handful of fish. Sure, I might not catch a limit, but I will often get very close to it, or sometimes the limit itself. This was another very nice Amador cut bow. Hands down, this reservoir stocks some of the prettiest rainbow trout in this entire area in the mother lodes. While putting that fish on the stringer that I just caught, the rod on the left hand side ended up getting a bite. I knew right away that this fish was on because whenever I'm fishing power bait, more times than not these fish will end up swallowing the bait itself. That's okay though, whenever I'm fishing power bait from the bank or just fishing power bait in general, I am fishing for keeps. I am looking to catch my limit of trout if possible. I picked up the rod and knew right away that this fish was on. This was a much smaller trout however, but I am not picky because I am looking to take home a 5 fish limit. Another complaint I often hear about this reservoir is the cost needed to fish this reservoir. Yes, some anglers will complain a lot about the cost to fish this reservoir, but all in total, I believe the reservoir is priced pretty fairly. To compare this reservoir to its other two sister reservoir of Party Reservoir and Lake Comanche, I actually prefer to fish this reservoir over the other two. This reservoir has great bank access, and despite these fish being rather finicky when the pressure is high, these fish will often always feed, and I can always find a handful of fish willing to cooperate. This was another beautiful Amador rainbow trout. These fish are so beautiful they look almost like wild trout. The sun was going down fast and I wanted to try one more area before calling it quits for the day. I had to wait until the end of the day to target this area because earlier today there were quite a handful of bass guys at the very back of this creek. I know for a fact that there will be some trout in this area, but I have a long walk back on the Frisbee trail to the parking. Fall is here, so the water is cold. I know that there will be fish that are close to the bank. One of the other mistakes I see a lot of anglers do is they'll often cast as far as they can into the deepest part of the lake. This is not the time of year to do that. These fish are literally hugging the bank, especially if there are boating pressure. The rod on the left hand side ended up getting a bite. I was dozing off on my phone and I didn't realize that this fish was really on. But with power bait fishing, more times than not, the fish will end up swallowing the hook. I believe I would have caught my 5 fish limit for the day if I were to have started fishing earlier. But today was one of those days where I got up rather late and decided only to fish the last 4 hours of the day. I have a bit of a walk to get back to the car on this Frisbee trail, so after landing this fish, I will call it quits for the day. I believe I would have caught a 5 fish limit if I were to have started the day earlier, but that's okay. Despite fishing for only a few hours, I did manage to get close to the limit, and I had a few other bites that I could not stick. Fall is moving along in the valley pretty quick, and in a few weeks, we will be entering early winter. So with that being said, there are still a handful of warm water fish that can be still caught from the bank, but with the trout stocking season on its way, I just wanted to show that this reservoir can actually be targeted successfully from the bank. Yes, this reservoir in the eyes of many anglers will often be in a love and hate relationship. Some anglers absolutely love this reservoir, while others absolutely hate this reservoir. But in my opinion, I actually really like this reservoir compared to its other two sister motherlode lakes around the area. When this trout finally came in, I knew right away that I caught myself one of those Amador blue trout. The blue trout is a variant of the rainbow trout and it is very shiny, very similar to an ocean run steelhead. This is the only reservoir in my area that consistently stock these blue trout. I'll show them to you guys real quick and I'll put them on the stringer. Overall, it was just a great short little evening out here on Lake Amador. I caught a handful of trout for the grill, and despite not catching my limit, I am very happy with what I caught today. I ended up going to the cleaning station, and here are the 4 fish I caught for the day. These fish ended up producing me some very nice bright orange fillets. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, tight lines, y'all.